Firstly, I'd just like to follow up from Deputy Canny's question in relation to expanding the local link in rural areas. I suppose I'm wondering, when will the service be fully accessible? It's obviously really important for people in rural areas in terms of just their independence and their personal mobility. And you spoke about just bringing forward a consultation in relation to that. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of time frame on that, if you have any idea how long it will take. And you also spoke about the funding, and I'm just curious because I suppose at this point we would hope or like to think that, you know, any kind of public transport that's being brought in, that it, you know, any funding that comes for that would be inclusive of the fact that the transport has to be accessible, that it's not like an additional stream of funding that you have to apply for in order to make it accessible. We kind of hope that it would just be a given at this stage. If you just expand a bit on what the situation is in relation to that, that would be great. Secondly, I suppose people with disabilities have to wait at bus stops in rural Ireland, and they don't have any shelter or adequate shelter oftentimes, which is problematic. So I'm wondering what the NTA is doing about that, and does it have a kind of work programme to address the issues? And to what extent is that funded? And just any information on that would be great. I also want to ask what the target date is for the NTA working towards the elimination of the practice of requiring people with disabilities to ring ahead to access transport services. Then I'm wondering if you have the figures of the buses, say, purchased or ordered in January 2020, how many of them have 2 wheelchair spaces? And then what plans have you to retrofit buses that only have 1 at the moment? Yeah, and if there's time, I'll come back in with more questions afterwards, Chair. I'll start with them first. If you could prioritise the one in relation to the local link, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Holly. So the Transport Authority?
Okay, I'll comment, and maybe my colleague Hugh will support me here as well. So just in terms of the funding for Local Link and the expansion of Local Link services, what I meant there was the funding of the operational costs. So we need additional subsidy to be able to provide for those services, because the fare revenue wouldn't be sufficient to actually meet the operational costs. So by expanding the services, we need additional PSO, so it's more on the operational side rather than the capital funding side, to be able to provide new services. That's across the board, not just for Local Link, but that would apply to all our urban and rural subsidised public transport services. So in terms of providing them, it would automatically be a requirement that they will be wheelchair fully accessible. And in terms of our Local Link, we have a very high level of accessibility across those services. And we are either in a position to be able to provide, or we are now in a position to be able to grant aid the purchase of fleet for the fleet owning rural transport operators, so that they can now transfer their fleet to being wheelchair accessible. But we're also through the tendering process requiring the fleet to be wheelchair accessible, and where possible low floor in as much as possible. So as I said, we have a very high level of accessibility through that services, and we want to get to fully accessible on our rural transport services, and that will be part of the expansion. In terms of Connecting Ireland, it's really more about where those services are going to be, and we will be later on this year we will start the consultation across Ireland in terms of where those services will be. My colleague Hugh might just respond on bus stops and shelters.
Okay, on bus shelters, we do have a programme which we roll out for bus shelters each year. They are expensive things to do. They all require individual planning permission. It takes a bit of time, and they also sometimes, actually quite frequently, require works to be carried out by the local authority to facilitate them. And all of that does take time to organise. We've been doing about 100 shelters a year around the country now. In the last year, because of COVID, that's gone down a bit, and we'd hope to do probably more than that. There are roughly 12,000 stops around the country, and it just isn't possible to put in a bus shelter every single one. So we do have to be somewhat selective as to where to put them in, where the most value can be gained. And that's the program we're working on. Roughly 100 bus stops, bus shelters a year, each requiring individual planning consent, and equally relied upon local authorities doing prior works to make changes to the road layout in those areas, which does take time. You asked also about, since January 2020, how many buses have we purchased with 2 wheelchair spaces? And the answer is we haven't purchased any. We've been purchasing buses with 1 wheelchair space and 1 buggy space for some years now. And we haven't transitioned to creating space for 2 wheelchairs, because it's going to require the removal of seating from the bus, and it's going to reduce the overall capacity. There may come a time when we're able to do that, but prior to COVID, we had a problem in terms of our bus service being over capacity. So the short answer to the question is we haven't purchased any buses with 2 wheelchair spaces. For the urban bus fleet, some for rural link maybe, local link may be purchased, but not for the urban bus fleet.
Thank you.
And
sorry,
I think there was one final question in relation to booking and the removal of the 24-hour booking, I suppose, booking ahead. So for bus services that have a low floor platform, there may be a requirement to take out some seats in order to access the wheelchair spaces. But generally, what we're trying to move to, particularly with low floor vehicles, is that wheelchair space is kept available at all times. So for the double deck coach fleet, that will be the requirement from now on. In terms of, Hugh, you might be able to speak about Irish Rail, and just in terms of the movement towards reducing the booking time, I suppose, and the requirement, for a ramp on rail services.
Well, the booking time has been reduced to 4 hours, but at the moment with the existing fleet, it does require ramp access on the DART service, and that does require an attendance by somebody in order to make that happen. So for the new DART fleet that's going to be purchased, and we are going to be purchasing a lot of new DART fleet, a lot of effort has gone in to see how we can minimise that what's called the platform to train interface, how we can make that work more successfully. That contract still isn't awarded, so I'm not in a position to be able to say what the solution that's emerging is. But I can absolutely confirm that it was a major focus of the tender process to try and improve that. But given the layout we have on some of our rail network, where stations are built on curves like Tara Station, there's a limit to what you can achieve, and it is very challenging. If all our stations had lovely, neat, straight lines, all the platforms at the same height, it would be a lot easier for us to make a transition. Fortunately, that's not the case.
Thank you so much. Can I just quickly, Chair, if it's okay, just a follow up on those ones? It'll be very quick. And you said later this year that the consultation will take place. I'm just wondering, do you know how long that will take then? I'm just wondering how long until we get to the point of expanding the rural local link. And then just in relation to the bus stops, you said it's not possible because there's 12,000. Is that just the approach of the funding that goes out of it, that there is no ambition or possibility of having a shelter at 12,000 bus stops?
Well, I'll take the second one first. It's just the sheer cost of it. 12,000 bus stops at 10 to 20,000 per bus stop is a lot of money. So, maybe there is a way it can be afforded over time, but certainly for now, we're having to prioritise and do what we believe are the most important ones. And what I didn't say in my answer, and I should have added in, with a number of local authorities, we're working with the local authorities to identify the top 20 or the top 30 bus stops in their county that need to have bus shelters. And so long as they're willing to do the advanced works that I mentioned earlier, such as changing a curb or changing drainage arrangements, something like that, then we can come in and install the bus stops. I suppose the ambition to spend that amount of money, we're not at the stage yet that we're saying every bus stop in the country needs a bus shelter. There's certainly a lot more of them need a bus shelter, but I think it may not be at the stage every single one needs it.
Just say, I suppose, because the point of view we're coming from as a committee is that we're the Disability Matters Committee, and this is something, just engagement with people around transport and stuff, that is a big barrier and deterrent and stuff for a lot of people with disabilities in terms of travelling. So I suppose we're coming from the point of view that like it doesn't really matter if one area needs it more than the other. If there's anybody in that area that can't access public transport as a result of a lack of facilities. So I suppose just to add a question to that, what can we do to ensure that there is funding for every bus stop to have that? Because I suppose at the end of the day, ultimately we're charged with, people being able to exercise their rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. The right to transport is very important in relation to that. So where is that funding stream coming from that we need to be pushing for you to get that then? Ultimately,
I don't think it's just funding. It's actually the physical ability to put the bus shelter in. So the biggest delay we have in bus shelters is in modification to the road. So you'll be aware yourself that you can put a bus pole in a particular location that's not obscuring visibility. If you put in a bus shelter and you're going around and it's on a corner, that bus stop is on a corner, it doesn't work. So suddenly everything has to change. You have to find a new place to stop the bus and build a new hard standing, etc. So actually the biggest constraint isn't funding. The biggest constraint is the ability of the local authorities, with all the demands they have on them at the moment, to do road modifications needed to put in additional bus shelters. And as I say, we tried to manage this by working out programs with them that here's their top 20 or 30, and when we get those done, we'll be in a better position to roll out more. So it's less funding and more local authority resources and the physical constraints of putting in a bus shelter as opposed to simple pole.
Okay, thank you.